Well, hello everybody. I am once again coming to you in a video with a hat. That is a very rare and exciting occasion. It is because my wife has absconded in the car with my hair gel in tow. So the options are either to have a distracting sort of fluffy mop or to have the hat on, and I decided that the hat would be less distracting. Arguably the only thing more distracting than the fluffy mop would be to open the video with talking about my hat.
Distraction! He's gone.
I want to do a slightly different style of video today. I'll do more sort of talking through some ideas. I've got the laptop with me in front of me if you see me looking down. And I want to talk about issues of abuse and of accusations towards church leaders off the back of what essentially happened recently with Mike Bickle. For those of you who don't know who Mike Bickle is, he is the head of IHOP, not the pancake one, the House of Prayer one. And for those who don't know, he was recently accused, or at least it came out publicly recently, that he has been accused of, I think it was 26 counts of sexual assault in one way or another. And I just think it's important for us to have a little think through, what do we do about things like this in the church? I want to say up front, firstly, obviously, I don't know what happened. I wasn't present. I'm not involved in this church. I don't know anything directly. All I know is the information that is publicly available, which is, you know, for obvious reasons, pretty limited. Also, when it comes to situations like this, I have seen both sides, right? So I know some people who have been raped or sexually assaulted in other ways. I am, when it comes to that, a believer that the death penalty is in fact the appropriate biblical punishment, the criminal punishment that the biblical code would say is appropriate for that. I understand there might be some degree of play in the margins ever so slightly, but when it comes to rape, I am on the very strongly against side, probably more strongly against than the majority of the people who are watching this video. At the same time, I also know someone who had a relative who was falsely accused of rape. That was then retracted on the eve of the trial, but during that time period between the accusation and the trial, which did not happen thankfully, because it was a false accusation, he entered into massive, depression, suicidal tendencies, self-harm, right? So I've seen both sides. So stuff like this is really important, and we do, in fact, need to deal with it well. And I want to give a few biblical principles for doing so. So, point one, we should always assume that someone is innocent until proven guilty. It is incredibly easy for someone to make an accusation. That is something that is quite common, actually, in our world. And in this particular instance, the majority of these accusations, seemingly all of them bar one, are anonymous or came through third parties. Now, the Bible is very clear that not all accusations are credible. If we think about the 10 Commandments, what is one of them? Do not bear false witness. That is actually speaking quite specifically. Obviously, it has broader application, but it's quite a specific idea to a sort of court or criminal case. Similarly, Jesus says, rejoice whenever people falsely accuse you. So that's one of the first things actually out of Jesus' mouth in the Sermon on the Mount, is that this is something that's going to happen. And I know some of you might be thinking, well, no, it couldn't mean accusations like that. It must mean some other kind of accusations. What other kind of accusations do you think he's talking about? You're not going to get falsely accused of not picking up your litter. You're going to get falsely accused of stuff that is major, that could potentially destroy your life, your ministry. So false accusations do exist, right? They're particularly common, it seems, in America. For some reason in America, I don't quite understand how this is the case. You guys are, as far as I'm concerned, nuts when it comes to this. But people can make accusations of sort of rape and sexual assault that are not criminal accusations. They are civil accusations. And I don't believe that's the case here. I've never heard of it here. It seems to be fairly common in the States. In a civil case, the burden of proof is not as high as in a criminal case. In a criminal case, it's beyond reasonable doubt. In a civil case, it is simply on the balance of probabilities. So most civil accusations of sexual assault simply end in lawyers settling, because the what is the point in bringing this to court? So it's quite an easy money grab. That is not to say that there are not actual accusations. It's not to say anything about these specific accusations, but it is to say that it is not that rare for people to make false accusations about things like this. If I was, say, a coven of witches, or if I was part of a coven of witches, which I'm glad to say I'm not.
What do you do with witches?
This is the kind of thing I would do. I would get a bunch of people to make anonymous third-party accusations on something like this towards a big leader. That's entirely plausible that that could happen. So that is why the assumption of innocence is really, really important. IHOP have come out, they've said that of the accusations, only one is credible. Now, credible, what do we mean by that? Well, it means that the others are impossible to investigate, right? It's impossible to say, and there may not even, it may be quite easy to dismiss those. If it's entirely anonymous, you can't investigate. If there's no sort of time frame given, if someone said that someone else said that something happened, that you can't investigate that, right? There's accusations you could make about someone that are very serious, but that are not credible. You could accuse me of having orchestrated, 9/11. That's not a credible accusation, right? I don't know the Bush family or Al Qaeda. Simmer down, it's a joke, right? Okay, but you get my point. You get what I'm saying. So none of these, all of these bar one seem to not be credible. That is, they are not possible to verify in any way. And the one that is credible does not mean that it's true. It just means that it's credible. It could have happened. So a credible accusation against me would be to say that I, punched a cat on the street outside, which I wouldn't do. I would normally kick a cat if I was, to deal with a cat or meet one in any capacity. That would be my choice of action. So credible accusation does not mean true accusation. Non-credible accusations, impossible to investigate. None of that means, by the way, that none of the accusations are true, including the ones that are not credible. It just means that you actually can't investigate them. You can't do a lot about accusations that are that vague or anonymous, or don't really have much to back them up or any way to tell whether or not they happened. Now, if behind the scenes, Mike Bickle, when confronted or faced with these accusations, broke down and said, it's all true, then you would absolutely have to remove him from ministry. I would say, though, that I'd want them to be public with that. They have not been public with that. So I think we need to really hold fire and not assume guilt, even when there are a number of accusations. If they are that vague and lacking credibility, then you got to default towards, we're going to assume innocence until proven guilty. Really important. Okay, point 2. Gag orders are not good. Gag orders are a problem.
Why are you gagging?
I'm sorry, but her gaggy face is making me gag.
So many of you know Donald Trump was gagged. He was not permitted to post about his cases on social media. IHOP say that Mike Bickle has agreed not to post on social media. My question is, was that something that was agreed or something that was imposed? And either way, I actually don't think it's particularly wise or necessary. Why do I think that? Well, the number one most important thing for his congregation, his staff, other ministry leaders, people across the world, the number one thing for them to know right now is, does he deny these allegations? That's really important. Now, his denial does not mean that he didn't do it. He could be lying. People lie. That's entirely plausible. But nonetheless, if he goes, I absolutely categorically refute these and I will face these in court. I have not done this. I've never done anything like this. That is massive. It's really, really huge. And people should be able to know what his stance is. And they should be able to know it now, because there is a trial going on right now. Now, the trial is not the criminal or civil trial. The trial is the trial in the court of public opinion. His church, Forerunner Church, which sort of is connected in with IHOP, And I'm sure that entire ministry is in turmoil right now. People are making decisions. Are they going to stay? Are they going to go? What are they supposed to do? What do they say to their friends? And that trial is that has already begun. That trial is going to be ongoing well in advance and probably be conducted and finished well in advance of any court case, of any actual trial. So I think whenever you have accusations that are made in public, then the person should be able to respond in public. I don't understand why we wouldn't want to know what his position is. Now, again, if he's broken down and said, yes, all true, or some degree of truth in this even, I don't want to post about it, I'm, going to repent, and I would totally be okay with that. But then I think the church should tell us that. Like, I think that IHOP should come out and go, that's what happened. Proverbs 18 tells us that the one who states his case first seems right until the other comes and examines him. So being able to respond to stuff like this is really, really important if we're going to deal with things accurately and biblically. Now, people say, well, you can't respond because that'll sway public opinion. Well, the accusations sway public opinion. The accusations unresponded to sways public opinion as well. It's kind of like saying that we're going to go into a boxing ring, but your opponent gets to take a bunch of free swings at you before you get into the ring and you're not allowed to do anything. It's like, well, no, the fight started at that point, so you're able to defend yourself. This is often overlooked, by the way, by churches. I've read some stuff recently, some reports where, there's accusations made and there's a big detailed thing, but no one ever goes to the accused. And biblically, that is what you should do. The person who is accused of sin should have a chance to be able to defend themselves. That's point 2. Okay, point 3 on this is the need to determine what is a disqualifying sin, what simply requires an apology, and what is not sin at all. Let's take a different case. Let's take the case of Matt Chandler. Now, Matt Chandler, he went a bit soft on the woke stuff, but I think he was hard done by in what happened to him a year or so ago. Basically, he was having an interaction with someone. He was messaging someone in his church. Her husband was aware of the messages. His wife was aware of the messages. None of them took any issue with any of this. But her friend, this woman's friend, decided that this was inappropriate. And so they went through this whole process. Basically, that woman accused him of being overly friendly. They went through this whole thing where he had to step away from ministry for months, stand up in front of his congregation, apologize. It was embarrassing for him and for his wife, and yet at the same time, the church said, well, he hasn't done anything disqualifying. That's actually not a biblical way to deal with this, right? The biblical way to deal with this is either he's committed a sin that is in some way in the category of adultery, in which case that would be a disqualifying sin, like you shouldn't be the senior pastor anymore. But everybody said, well, he hasn't done that. Or he's done something that is maybe a tad unwise, maybe lacked a little bit of, here was a better process to deal with it. Maybe they didn't have that going on, but which wasn't disqualifying, in which case it didn't need dealt with publicly, didn't need him to step down publicly. It would have been a simple apology to whoever felt affected by this or whoever he could have affected through a lack of wisdom. And perhaps it wasn't even sin. Perhaps it was just this wasn't best practice. The reality is that, look, senior pastors do still sin. I'm not a senior pastor, right? But I am a pastor, but I can tell you, even senior pastors do still sin. They will continue to sin throughout their whole lives. Not every sin needs dealt with publicly. Not every sin is a disqualifying sin. Most need a simple apology, a simple act of repentance. That's what has to be done with most sin. So you got to determine that correctly when it comes to issues like this.
I am a sinner. Say it louder. I am a sinner.
I am a sinner.
Louder, Daniel. I am a sinner.
I am a sinner.
Okay, point 4. HR companies are not good at biblical discipline. We talk about spheres of government, right? And there are multiple spheres of government. In the church, there are elders, and in the sort of civil sphere, there is the government. Church elders are there to investigate. If there's an investigation required over whether or not something is sinful and what the level of that sin is, that is what church elders are for. If there is something that is potentially illegal, if there's an investigation into that, that is what the police are for. And there are things that can indeed be both, and definitely elders should not be investigating criminal cases. Neither, by the way, should police be determining whether or not something is sin. That said, do you know who has no remit at all to investigate either of these things? Random HR companies. Random HR companies have nothing to do with whether or not something is sin or whether or not something is illegal. Now, I understand why churches lean this way. They think that these companies are going to be unbiased, but they're not unbiased. Let me explain. These companies need to justify their reason for existence. They need to justify that this is something that churches should do. So they are under pressure to make things seem more scandalous, more extreme, much worse than perhaps they are. Let me put it this way. Have you ever seen one of these companies brought into a church, done a full investigation, and then said at the end, yeah, basically your senior pastor said about 3 things that could be misconstrued over 20 years and he should possibly apologise to person A, B and C? No, that's not what they do at all. What do they say? They say it's some toxic atmosphere. They say it's, narcissism, yada, 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 very controlling. And very often they've misdefined those terms. Senior pastor says to someone, you should repent of this sin. And that person says, oh, well, that was spiritual abuse. And the HR company is likely to agree. That might not be spiritual abuse. Usually it's not. Usually the person just actually needed to repent of sin. So I don't think it's wrong to use these companies to get advice on good practices for staff or something like that. But when it comes to an investigation into sin, they are not the people for it. Do you know who would be the best people for it? The best people for it would be a group of biblically minded, serious, holy, living, spiritually mature people who know and love the congregation and know and love the senior pastor, and preferably, for situations like this at least, are probably not paid, so their jobs are not dependent on the success of the church or if something takes a hit, and perhaps with some outside Christian counsel. That would be an elder board. Those are the least biased people. They are the best people to bring in. That is their job. If you're going to judge angels, you can possibly adjudicate over whether or not something is sinful. Again, different if it's illegal, but if it's sinful, that is where this should go. And finally, point 5. Again, we're going to go wider than the Mike Bickle situation here. We're just going to look at general accusations, right? If there are accusations of things that are popular buzzwords, so let's say things like toxic, spiritual abuse, narcissism, controlling, etc., you actually need concrete examples that are really, really legitimate, and you also have to look at those in a wider context, right? It's very easy to take every single comment that someone has said over a long ministry that wasn't good, but, one bad comment doth not a spiritually toxic environment make. That's not how it works. You need repeated patterns of controlling, self-serving, manipulative, nasty behaviour. Things like tone and context matter. Things like, okay, was that said as a joke and everybody knew it was a joke, or was that said seriously? All of these things are very important. You also need to look at it then in, the broader context of what everybody has experienced, right? So think about it this way. If you're a parent, right, and we took all of your worst moments as a parent and, all the times you shouted when you shouldn't have shouted, times you were short with your kids in one way or another, the times that you felt run down and didn't spend enough time with your kids, times you were busy and you didn't see them as much as you would like, the time you gave them gummy worms for dinner, right? Just things that would not be considered great parenting.
I'm the bad parent.
I'm the bad parent.
If you took all of those and you compiled them and said, oh, look, here's everything this person has done wrong, you could paint a fairly bad picture of a parent, even if they're broadly speaking a good parent, right? Even if they're not actually a bad one. But if you put that in a wider context, you see, oh, there's a whole other context here where, yeah, this person makes mistakes. Yeah, they get it wrong sometimes. But broadly speaking, these children are well loved, well rounded, well adjusted. They're nice. They shower at least once a year. Like, that's not, well, okay, you should shower your kids more. I'm joking about the showering thing, but you get my point. That is not a toxic atmosphere. That's not a toxic family. The same is very true in a church, right? You can find moments where your senior pastor or any leader has said something they shouldn't have said. You can find times where if you just look at that, but if you go out and you just analyze the 15 people that were annoyed at the church and left, and you take their opinion and you do a nice big chart on, well, this person said this and this person said this. Well, is that an accurate reflection of the church as a whole? No, it's not. If half of 1% of the church say that this was a really terrible atmosphere, well, 99.5% clearly don't think so, because they're still there. They don't think it's terrible. And to accuse that, this is where I find these false accusations are a problem. To accuse people of being abusive or toxic is in fact a way to weaponize those terms in a way which is itself abusive and toxic. Like, it's destructive to churches, to lives, to ministries. Churches, they should, as much as we should take accusations very seriously, and we do take them very seriously, we should also not enable a toxic victimhood culture any more than we should enable toxic leadership. So anyway, I hope that's helpful. I think that this is an area that if you are a church elder, if you're sitting around a senior leader, this is something you need to have read up on and thought about very seriously. You actually need to have it spelled out in your bylaws or church governing documents somewhere, because things like this will happen. Church leaders of any nature, big, small, famous, unknown, can all sin. They can all do things that are egregious. They could all commit disqualifying sins. They could end up committing crimes. Absolutely. Accusations may well come. You need to be able to deal with them. You need to be able to take them very seriously. The way you take them seriously is to deal with them biblically. And I hope and pray in Mike Bickle's case and in every other case that is what happens. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to buy this hat, I don't sell it, but you could buy something else. You could buy something from wearecontramundum.com, which I do sell and therefore helps fund this channel. So please do check that out, or you can support us on Patreon or PayPal. You can also do me the great honor and privilege of tapping the like button ever so normally and not smashing it, because that's unusual. Just hit it in a normal fashion, hit retweet or whatever if you're on Twitter/X, whatever we call it now. And if you're on YouTube, here's the next video.